Hello, welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. I have a very interesting guest today. She is a psychologist and she is doing fascinating work, and she's going to share what she knows and understands about her work. And her name is Dr. Ruth Goldston, and I'd like to introduce you. Ruth, welcome to Backstory.
Thank you, Joan. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, we've been having a nice chat about what she's doing and what she's teaching and learning, and what you want to share. You're a psychologist, but you're also working in the area of meditation, correct?
Correct, yes. I've Meditation is a big thing these days. There's a lot of it around. There's a lot of people doing it, and it's been incorporated in various formal ways into the practice of psychotherapy. And so pretty much anywhere you look, somebody's offering meditation. I think of what I do with people as mindfulness practice, which is a little more narrow than the whole field of meditation, because there are many things you can be aiming for when you're meditating. In what I do and what I like to work with, I'm working with mindfulness. And what does that mean? Mindfulness means your awareness of the present moment. And when you think about it, I guess a good example is when you're driving and all of a sudden you're driving a very familiar route, and all of a sudden you find yourself home and you have no recollection of what happened because you were totally absorbed in your own thoughts. That may sound like it's mindful, but in fact, it's sort of mindless because you have no awareness of what's going on in the moment. It's just sort of happening, like a tape just running. So by the time the thing we want people to learn how to do is to cultivate more of an appreciation and a noticing of the present moment. And it turns out that has a lot of benefits that have been shown, with research. Certainly, these practices have been in existence actually for thousands of years in various religious traditions, contemplative traditions. Buddhism particularly comes to mind, but almost every major world religion, probably even the minor ones, have some form of meditation or mindfulness practice as sometimes part of what they would call a more spiritual side or even a more mystical side. But there's nothing sort of weird or mystical about it. It's really just learning how to pay attention to what's going on right now. And on the one hand, maybe that sounds very simple, and on the other hand, it can be very challenging.
Mm-hmm. Can you give some examples of people that you were able to do this with and what happened as a result?
Well, I will say that mindfulness practice does require practice. And I often say this to people because without practicing, it is a little bit like going into the Olympics when it turns out you're having like a major anxiety attack. That's the Olympics, and you've been practicing, or if you haven't been practicing, you're on a tricycle. You're barely able to walk. So you can't go to the Olympics until you've sort of trained. And that puts people off, I think, because these days everybody wants an instant result. Um, and I think a misconception that people have about mindfulness and meditation practice is that you're supposed to get everything out of your mind. You're supposed to have a blank slate in your mind, which certainly is not true, although there are forms of meditation that aim for that. That's not what I'm talking about or what I'm using. In any case, the awareness of the present moment can help someone to calm down, for starters. And one of the ways you do that is by becoming aware of your breathing. And that's a very simple way to start to practice mindfulness. So being aware of your breathing means that you turn your attention to something that we rarely think about unless we're having trouble doing it. Um, Luckily, it happens all by itself, but it is the one bodily function, unlike your heart or your digestive system, that you can really actually manipulate a little bit. You can notice that you're breathing quickly. You can notice that you're breathing slowly. You can notice that your breathing is shallow or deep. Um, you can notice any number of things about it. It turns out it's very interesting. It sounds boring when you first hear it. What do you mean? I'm going to notice my breath? Big deal, But in fact, there's lots to notice. And the first thing I usually have people do, and I'll invite, today's people who are joining us to try this yourself. And it's just the very, very first thing to do. And that is to notice your breathing. Now, right now, I'm not noticing my breathing too much because I'm taking a breath and then using it to speak. But those of you who are watching, unless you're talking to somebody, you could pay attention just now. You don't have to close your eyes or go lie down or do anything, just where you are right now, just paying attention to your breathing and just notice what's going on. I'll give you a second here to try that. And so one of the first things you can do, especially if you're trying to help yourself with something like anxiety. Anxiety is usually associated with shallow, rapid breathing. And something you can do that will help is to slow down your breathing. And so you can notice, you can maybe count in your head, count the inhale, count the exhale. They might be the same length, they might be different lengths, just with what's going on right now, not changing it. And then if you like, you can change it. You can maybe count and see how long your breath is one way or another, and then add a count, and that extends the breath. And then maybe add another count to the inhale, to the exhale. And in so doing, you slow your breathing down, and it turns out that slower breathing is sort of incompatible with high anxiety. So your body automatically starts to relax. And that's something that I've used with many, many people. That very simple strategy, though it's not a strategy that you can just, again, pull out of the air and say, okay, well, now I'm going to do this and I'm going to be calm. You might bring your anxiety down a little bit if you do that. And if you really practice, you may find that you can, over time, bring it down farther. It may, you won't do it in 1 minute or 2 breaths. It might take a while. So that's one of the main things that I work with people on. Times when they get, again, usually really anxious. And this is something that you can do to calm down, to notice your breath, and then to lengthen it.
And didn't you tell me that one of the experiences was flying, that there are people who, yes, when they fly, yes, tell us that, when they fly in an airplane, it's very anxiety.
Well, I suspect I'm not the only one who suffered from this problem long ago, but many people are fearful of flying. And when I was much younger, I guess in my 20s, I actually learned the basics of mindfulness practice from a colleague of mine. And I used it when I was on an airplane, because at the time I was pretty fearful of flying. And those techniques helped me a great deal, so that I was able to calm myself. I was able to focus not so much on all the external things that were going on, but more on what was going on inside me, and relax. And so, yeah, that's definitely one. If anyone's watching who has a fear of flying, that's one of the techniques that I think most people who treat this condition would recommend. There's other things too, but it certainly helped me.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of other people you've worked with where there were other types of anxieties and how you try to help with that?
Well, let me explain another application of mindfulness. Um, as you know, I haven't spoken about this yet, but I'm very interested in people's emotions. It's been a long-standing interest since I was in graduate school, and there are methods for using mindfulness practice to help you manage emotions. And one of the things that I can do with people is to help them be present with the emotion that they're feeling right then. Because we spend a lot of time and effort and energy, believe it or not, trying not to feel our emotions. The ones, well, whatever one, some of the ones like anger and sadness that we have maybe negative connections with for one reason or another. And the time that we are spending holding that off is time because we're afraid of feeling it. We're afraid of feeling that emotion. And it's not the emotion we're afraid of. Usually, it's the consequences of it. Maybe we don't want to feel angry because we're afraid we might hit someone or hurt them. We might be afraid of sadness because we feel we'll lose control and never stop crying. It turns out if you stop pushing it away so much and just sort of let it be there, then you can learn about it, with the help of, in this case, me, your therapist. You can learn more about it, and you can discover that if you allow yourself to feel the feeling, actually, it's much easier. Again, there are things to learn from it. It's not a matter of making it go away necessarily. I do believe that, in every emotion that we feel, there's a grain of truth. There is something that we can learn from what we're feeling. It's not always obvious what that is. And again, that's why you have somebody like me maybe to help you. But even without that, there's a lot to learn that, people can learn to figure out what those emotions might be telling you that you want to know, because that's usually the case. And that's actually different from saying, oh, I'll just let the emotion go away, or it's different from what we often get told. Don't feel that way. Don't feel that way. Well, okay, again, there's a grain of truth there somewhere, and maybe we'll find better ways to manage the emotion once we've allowed it to be there. Not necessarily the behavior, for example, with anger, if you want to hurt or hit somebody, then we're not too fond of that idea. And it's usually not called for. But the anger is probably telling us something we need to know. And that's the kind of thing I work on with people. I also teach this course called Cultivating Emotional Balance. It's a course that the Dalai Lama actually instigated and supported its formation, its development with a number of world-renowned researchers in emotion and neuroscience and contemplatives and so on, to really learn more about what emotions mean and then apply mindfulness strategies to learn more about them. So that's something that I'm very interested in, and I was trained to teach the course. I now sort of have incorporated more of my own content to it, so it's kind of a mixture of stuff, and I hope to be offering it again soon.
Wonderful. I went last night to one of your mindfulness,
Yes.
right? And we had this terrible, terrible storm. We drove through the terrible rain and thunder and lightning, and it was amazing how many people showed up. All got there because they wanted to be there, because they needed to be there. And what happened when we got there? We were all soaking wet, by the way.
I know. I know. And we heard the rain while we were practicing. And I recall that I was actually sort of incorporating the rain into how we were observing our bodies, what we were experiencing, because of course we were all hearing it. And sometimes we were hearing thunder. So it wouldn't really do to say, oh, don't listen to that. It was more like, okay, well, there it is. It's right there. Good news. We're safe. We're in the dark, in the dry, and we're not soaking wet, so we can relax. We're okay. And that's often an important question to ask yourself. Am I okay right now? Well, yeah, I am. There may be things I'm worried about for the future. There may be things I'm wondering about from the past, but right this minute, I'm okay. And that's a good feeling.
So it's trying to understand yourself, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
and accept your emotions. Yeah.
Yes, which I think there's so much, pressure out there not to, that some emotions are bad, that they're feelings we shouldn't have, that, maybe due to our gender or our race or our ethnic background, we're allowed to show certain emotions but not others. And there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn. And I find it fascinating. I've been thinking about it for years and hope to continue to think about it for years and to be able to share what I know, again, coupled with this very powerful tool, which is the practice of mindfulness.
This is wonderful. And so a lot of it can come out of our childhood, can come out of our parental training. And then the parents will translate some of their anxieties into us. And that gets transferred. And therefore, people need to deal with those emotions, don't they?
Yes, I think that it's inevitable that whatever it was we've experienced, especially as young children, is going to have some impact. Um, I do think that the more you can change in the present, the more you see the past in a different way. You can be more accepting of it. And so it's a very, it's a complicated way in which things are woven together. I know I have clients who are quite convinced that if only we could get to that trauma from childhood, if only they could remember it, if only they could deal with it, that everything would work out. And I think that's, we've all heard the stories about someone who suddenly remembered something traumatic that happened to them, and then they were on their way to healing. That doesn't always happen, and we don't always know. But we may be able to recognize certain habits. For example, whatever the dominant emotions were in your family. Maybe people yelled at each other all the time. Maybe people held their emotions in. I mean, that's a big thing. The stiff upper lip. Um, that's that's definitely built into our culture in a big way, that you're never supposed to even show an emotion, that emotions are weak. And I have to say, this is another thing that I'm eager for people to think about differently. The idea that emotions are somehow um, the um, the neglected stepchildren of our consciousness, and really what we're interested in is what our minds can do, the rational thought. And we've been sold this for centuries, and with good reason. I think the development of more rational thought has been an important thing in making progress in various ways. But I think that we've given emotions short shrift. I think that emotions need to be on an equal level with our rational thinking. Again, because they're telling us things. It's just that we don't know that language. They tell it to us in a way that we don't necessarily understand with our language capability and the words and everything else. So we have to learn to understand that language. And the language of emotion is sometimes in the words, but it's often in the facial expressions, in the gestures, in the vocal tone. And all of that together gives us information that we are responding to all the time, but we may not be aware of it.
That's so interesting. What about children or people who've experienced international trauma, such as wars?
Well, certainly, children, well, first of all, the people who experienced it, whether they are adults or children, have different ways of responding. Certainly, war is one time when we don't feel safe. And that is, that kind of gets our most basic instincts going to preserve our own lives. So we're frightened, and there's a reason we're frightened. Sometimes when we're scared and you're sitting in your house and there's really nothing there that is going to, require your immediate attention. But, when there are bombs falling, when there is an army coming, I've been fortunate never to experience that, but many people have experienced that. Then, your primary focus is on protecting yourself, protecting your children, doing everything you can to sustain your lives. And if that happens long enough, then that becomes the way you are. You're always looking for the thing that's going to threaten your life. And you might even think, when you hear a little noise, that's something that's going to threaten your life. And so on the one hand, we have to acknowledge that when these things happened and you were taking care of yourself or your children, that was absolutely the thing you had to do, and that your fear was helping you. And that now, we can be grateful that that's what happened in the past, but it's not the right tool for now, that there are other tools to learn. And so it's hard. I mean, it's very hard, I think, for people to let go of, some of the fear and anxiety that remains after a traumatic situation, whether it's a single thing like a car accident, or if it's going through, a war or, other violence. Yeah.
So there's much we need to be aware of, not only for ourselves, but for other people, to help other people.
Right. And, our source of information for that is often ourselves. Because, for example, when you hear a baby cry, there's kind of an automatic reaction of that baby needs something, that baby is helpless, I need to do something about it. And that's the only tool the baby has at his or her disposal to alert, the parent, the adult, that I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm dirty, whatever it is. And of course, there's a whole, different cries, different ways of vocalizing the cry can sometimes let you know which of those things it is. But lots of times, it isn't totally clear. Maybe I have a tummy ache. Anybody who's been with small children knows that sometimes that's all you're hearing. And then as they get older, they begin to speak, they begin to be able to say what they're feeling, and the caretaker, the parent, the adult, whoever it is, can have a better idea. Of course, there is the needs of the adult too, and sometimes when a baby is screaming all night, that does have, an impact on the person who's hearing it and is maybe very frustrated that they can't stop it in some way. So lots of things to think about there too.
Mm-hmm. So these are things, understandings that would be helpful in schools, for example, when we're, yeah, go on. Yeah.
Well, I was wanting to hear what you were thinking of.
Oh, well, what I was thinking of is what I've been reading about. I mean, I've been a teacher since I'm in my early 20s and started out in New York. But what I'm reading about in local newspapers now about schools where their kids are struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with bullying, they're struggling with a sense that they're not safe. And what can we do to help them? Because they need help. Because some of them are going into depression, some of them are considering or suicide. I mean, we have serious problems that have to be addressed.
Right. So again, there's a grain of truth. And I don't mean that a person, who's feeling depressed should commit suicide. I don't mean that. But one of the things depression tells us is that we've run out of ideas of how to cope with something. We've tried things and nothing seems to work. And so depression is, in fact, an adaptive response. You might be surprised to hear that. It's an adaptive response that, if it is listened to, um, can be helpful. All the things you've been trying are not working. So what's available to you? Escaping the situation in some way. Sometimes that's not available to you. So you actually shut your consciousness down. People who dissociate, they see themselves they feel themselves to be on the ceiling watching what's going on, because it's just too traumatic to be there in the moment, and there's no escape. I mean, I think of a lot of situations of sexual abuse, for example, within families, or well, anyway, with young children, that's something that they do. And then again, that saves them in the moment. It allows them to survive, and then they keep doing it. That people may keep dissociating even when it isn't a situation like that. They may not figure out that they do have things that they can do. So in terms of school and children, the whole issue of the who's in charge here, the bully was the one who wants to be in charge, and the object of the bullying, the other child or whoever it is, needs to figure out how to deal with this. And the reality of a lot of bullying is, you might be able to run away from it. You might suffer some shameful consequences as a result, being told that you're scared, um, uh, and that shame really can happen there. And that may be your best bet. And even sometimes it's going to be difficult to do that, but you suffer a price for that. You suffer a consequence, which is you start to not think very well of yourself. So I'm not that familiar with all the things going on in bullying in school, but I have to say it's a situation that we face in our adult lives as well. In the work world, where there are people, whether they're your boss or someone on your work team, who can make your life pretty miserable through bullying in various ways. And there, a lot of people quit jobs because they can't tolerate it anymore. So
Well, Ruth,
lots of things to think about.
you have given us so much to think about, and you've certainly given us thoughts about why in many situations we need the help of people like you. We need the help of psychologists and people who want to help understand other people and their feelings and their lives. And this is an important thing to understand. We need your help. And thank you so much, Dr. Ruth Goldston, for coming today on Backstory with Joan Goldstein. Thank you.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.